With the arrival of home Pong, people got excited about the idea of having Pong in the home, obviously. But whereas home Pong could only offer the few game variants that were built into the machine itself, the second generation of consoles allowed people to buy interchangeable cartridges. Which of those consoles was the best? I have decided, and I will tell you now. 9! In last place, it's the Fairchild Channel F. It's a bit unfair to compare it to the others we're going to see, given it was the first released in November 1976. It's definitely a step up from 1975's Home Pong and 1972's Magnavox Odyssey, thanks in no small part to it being the first console to use a microprocessor. But with a colour palette of just 8 colours, it still looks rubbish. Think I'm being harsh on the Fairchild? I guess maybe I'm an unfair child, what? 8! At 8, it's 1978's Magnavox Odyssey 2. It's more advanced than the original Odyssey in that it didn't rely on translucent plastic sheets and static electricity to create the illusion of graphics like its predecessor. But they might as well not have bothered, because at least the overlays back then looked alright. In the US, the Odyssey 2 ended up being one of the top 3 second-generation consoles, but if they hadn't had the established Magnavox name, they would never have been in that position because, compared to the systems we'll be seeing later, it is bum. Strange choice of words? Well, I guess I'm odd, you see. Odyssey. I can't keep the pun thing going. Sorry, I know you'll be disappointed. Some of you will be mad as an ox. Magnavox? That doesn't even slightly work. 7. Next up, it's the lesser spotted Emerson Arcadia 2001. Having a number that sounded futuristic as part of the console's name might have seemed impressive in 1982, but it did nothing to improve the system's incredibly basic graphics. Some of these really don't seem like much of an upgrade over the Odyssey 2, which, lest we forget, had launched 4 years earlier. I could say more about it, but I won't. No more puns. 6! At number 6, it's the Bally Astrocade. Superior graphics for its time, this one, given it was released back in 1977, before even the Odyssey 2 launched. But with a price tag $100 higher than its rivals, most systems shipped for around $200 in this era, I've had to mark it down. A relatively limited selection of games, but some nice ones for sure. In my opinion, the Astrocade was Astro-K. Okay, I should have left it. 5. Just sneaking into our top 5, it's a system that's very different to everything else. The Vectrex. Costing the same as its peers, despite having to include its own monitor, its combination of vector graphics, impressively fast action, and colour overlays to compensate for its black and white screen make this the most arcadey feeling of everything on this list. However, its uniqueness was also its weakness, as vector graphics prevented the system offering many of the iconic non-vector arcade titles gamers wanted. Still, out of everything on the list, it's the one I now want the most, so by all means do send me a free Vectrex, please. And while you're popping that in the post, it's time for our top 4. As I said at the start, so much emphasis in this era was placed on bringing the arcade into the home, so with our final 4 systems, we're going to decide who ultimately wins based on their delivery of some iconic arcade games. And those games are 1980's Pac-Man, 1981's Frogger and Donkey Kong, and 1982's Zaxxon and Qbert. And the systems we're going to look at are 1977's Atari Vcs, also known as the 2600, 1979's Intellivision from Mattel, and from 1982, the Atari 5200 and the Colecovision. Right, that's the admin out of the way. First up, Pac-Man! So, obviously you can see here this is the arcade version and it is ace. By way of contrast, these are the 4 versions on the consoles. Bottom right there, the Colecovision, clearly the best of the 4, with I think the 5200 in the bottom left, second place, not far behind. And then the older 2 machines at the top, obviously much, much worse. But to be fair, the Intellivision does a serviceable job, whereas the 2600, famously, the Pac-Man version on that is just utter garbage. So I'm going to give 8 out of 10 to the ColecoVision, 7 for the 5200, 5 for the Intellivision, and 2, and I'm being generous, for the 2600. Next game is Frogger. Once again, this is what the arcade version looked like. I love Frogger, it is my mum's favourite game. Fight me. Here's it on the 4 consoles. So actually, none of them really do a brilliant job of replicating the arcade on this occasion. In fact, the 2600, which was garbage for Pac-Man, in terms of colour palette and shapes of cars and things, is probably the closest. I think the 5200 edges it ever so slightly. There's a little bit more detail to it. But the ColecoVision's really not pulling its weight, and the Intellivision looks garbage. So I'm going to give 7 to the 5200, 6 to the 2600, 5 to the ColecoVision, and 3, and again I'm being generous, to the Intellivision for that one. So where does that leave us? It means the 5200 has now overtaken, 1 point in the lead of the ColecoVision, and the other 2 machines neck and neck on 8. Next game, Donkey Kong. So this is the Nintendo Classic as we played it in the arcades. Yum, yum, yum. Yes, please. And now, if we take a look at it on the consoles, the Colecovision, unsurprisingly the best one here, given they're the guys that originally licensed this from Nintendo and used it as a way to show off how much better their console was than everybody else's. But Atari's version on the 5200 is also very good, whereas the top two, I mean, Donkey Kong looks like he was drawn by someone who'd literally never seen a gorilla. So I'm going to give the Colecovision 9, 5200 8, 2600 I think edges it maybe. I'll give it 5 and a television 4, but neither of them have done particularly good. But where does that leave us? It's now neck and neck. Colecovision and 5200 both on 22 points. 2600 nudging it ever so slightly ahead. But there's everything to play for. Next up, it's Zaxxon. This is the arcade version. Glorious sort of faux 3D isometric shooter game. It is ace. But if we take a look now at that on the consoles, you can see on this one, the older consoles really just couldn't do it. So the 2600 and Intellivision didn't even bother trying. They've just gone with a sort of into the screen 2D affair. Whereas the ColecoVision and 5200 do attempt it. I think maybe the 5200 is slightly, they're sort of both bad in different ways, aren't they? But I think the 5200 I favour ever so slightly. So I'll give that a 6, the ColecoVision 5. Neither get high points because no one did a good job. In television, I'll give 2, and the 2600, which just couldn't cut it, I'll give it 1. And that means the 5200 has nudged back into the lead. 28 plays 27 for the ColecoVision, whereas 2600 and Intellivision now both tied for least good of the top 4. That's not a thing, on 14 points. But there is one more game left, and that is, of course, Qbert. This is the arcade version. Glorious game. It's weird that this game hasn't had more sequels or done more in the years, because it's a really addictive puzzle platformer, but it hasn't. What did it look like on the consoles? It looked like this. Again, no one really redeeming themselves other than the 5200 in the bottom left there. I'd say that's probably worth 8 points for the 5200, whereas the ColecoVision is just so stretchy. I'm now wondering whether I've grabbed a YouTube video of that where it stretched it and that's not the actual ratio, but I'm going to mark it down anyway because I don't care, so I'm giving that a 6. I'll give the Intellivision 5. The Intellivision, given how old it is actually probably doing almost as well as the Coleco, but the 2600, that doesn't look like isometric graphics, mate. You've failed. I'll give you 4. So where does that leave us? Our top 4 are as follows. At number 4, it's the Atari VCS. At number 3, it's Mattel's Intellivision. Just missing out on the top spot at number 2, it's the ColecoVision. So at number 1, it's a surprise win for the often maligned Atari 5200. Or is it? Because it turns out there wasn't actually an Atari 5200 version of Donkey Kong, despite what you might read on the internet. What we saw was actually the Atari 400 computer version of Donkey Kong, and the confusion seemingly comes from the fact that the 5200 console was based on the Atari 400 and 800 computers. Also, the 5200 had a famously shonky joystick that made games difficult to play, so I'm going to dock Atari some points for that as well. It's my list, I can do what I want. And so, at 2 now, it's the Atari 5200, and at number 1, it's the ColecoVision. Disagree with me in the comments? I dare you.